I'm gonna record. I'm gonna record this. That way, if anybody wants to go back and and review anything we talked about, they can. Um, can everybody see my screen? Can I get one confirmation from somebody?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So basically, this is what we're gonna talk about. Intro to prescribed fire weather and planning. So this is just going to be the basic information. There's a lot of this that you can go way more in depth into if you so choose, but this is the bare bones, as I see it anyways, for planning a prescribed burn up here in the mountains. So we're going to talk about fire lines, fuel types, fire weather. We'll talk about the burn plan. We probably won't go too deep into the burn plan because it does take a while to fill out. If anyone wants help filling out a burn plan at any point, we can arrange to meet in person or over Zoom and go through it more thoroughly. Because there are a few things on there that are not super intuitive, but hopefully this information will make it a little easier. And then we'll talk about permitting and courtesy. So, fire lines, kind of the standard math that I like to go by and that I've heard other folks go by is that your minimum fire line width should be your expected flame length multiplied by 1.5 on flat ground with no wind. So that means if you're burning in grass or leaf litter and you're thinking you're going to get a 2-foot flame length, then your fire line should be at least 3 feet wide. And again, that's on flat ground with no wind. And how often does that happen, especially up here in the mountains? Not very. So a lot of time we have to factor in some other things. And kind of my rule of thumb is I like to add 1 foot of fire line width for every 2 miles per hour of wind. That's surface wind. And then double the fire line width for every 45-degree or 100% slope. So on that burn plan, it's going to ask for your percent slope on your burn unit. And I'm a carpenter by trade, so I tend to think more of degrees. So thinking about a 45-degree angle, if that's the slope that you're burning on or part of your slope, then you might need to increase the width of your fire line. So this is a pretty good picture of a student here at the Arthur Morgan School in Yancey County prepping some fire line in hardwood leaf litter. And this one in particular, it was kind of easy to blow. This was a trail that they use a lot there at the school. But because it's in kind of a ditch, it actually makes a really solid fire line. We're going to be burning to the right side of this picture. So if you can imagine lighting off the edge of those leaves right there on the fire line, it's going to have a hard time creeping back down to the left and across the ditch where we've exposed that soil. And up here in the mountains, kind of what we're shooting for with our fire lines is to get down to that organic layer that we're not trying to burn. If you really are uncomfortable and you think you're going to get a higher flame intensity, you may want to go even deeper with hand tools and use more of a mineral soil, get down to the dirt as your fire line, because that really will stop fire. If it's really dry enough up here, that kind of organic duff layer, we call it, will burn. But most of the time with the burns we're executing, it's never going to be that dry. So here's another picture of a burn. We ended up lighting off both sides of this fire line here. But you can kind of see we pretty much prepped this line with weed eaters. We rarely used hand tools on this one at all, but weed eaters and leaf blowers. We use the weed eaters to chop the grass as low as possible, and then we use leaf blower to blow away most of that debris. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but between all the little grassy stuff that's left in this fire line that's running down the center is dirt. So we got down pretty close to the dirt for most of that. So the fire line here is on the left side, just behind where this guy Jazz is standing. And again, here we used a combination of brush cutters, weed eaters, some hand tools on this one because there was so much brush and debris along the top of this ridge here that we had to cut it down, rake it away, and then we were able to blow what was left off to the side. So it doesn't take much in the right conditions to kind of remove the fuel source for this fire. And I should have put a picture of it, but in fire, we kind of have, right, three things that make fire possible: fuel, heat, and oxygen. And so in structure firefighting, they normally remove the heat with water to put stuff out. In wildfire fighting and prescribed fire, we're going to remove the fuel out of that triangle, and then that creates a fire break. So removing that fuel from the fire line so that the fire can't cross or spread. This is a good example of just how green grass can stop a fire in its tracks. Green grass doesn't burn unless it's super dry. And I just used a blower along this edge to clear most of the leaves. You can see I didn't even get them all, but it was just enough to stop the fire in its tracks. And this was pretty hot. I think the relative humidity on this day was kind of in the low to mid 20s. So we burned a lot of leaf litter, and we used grass to kind of contain most of that fire. Same thing here. This is in Buncombe County. You can kind of see Scott there is standing with a backpack sprayer of water, just kind of watching this bottom edge of the fire line. So we put fire along this mowed patch at the bottom of this slope, and that just kind of reduces, right? If we mow it, it reduces the amount of fuel that's there. We use blowers to blow away all the clippings, and then all that's left is kind of the moist stems of the grass. And then just kind of a little bit of water is all that it takes to manage that fire line, assuming you don't have a whole bunch of wind or super dry conditions. So this is another burn we did in Yancey County. Felix, I think, was the burn boss on this one. And we used this kind of existing Forest Service road. And all we did was use a leaf blower to clear the leaves. You can kind of see on the right side here where where it was lit off, where we lit this burn off. It burned into the leaves. It had a hard time creeping to the left into the road. And that was enough to create an adequate fire line in this case. Again, a lot wider than we needed it, but it was the road was already there. It wasn't a whole lot of work to rake or blow the leaves away from the burn unit and create an extra wide fire line. It's always better to go a little wider, especially on your first burn if you're nervous and stuff like that. This is another good picture of a field burn. This trail right here where this guy is standing, right on the edge of that field. We didn't actually use that as a fire line. We burned on both sides of that, but that was pretty adequate to stop the fire from moving from that taller fuel on the left onto the edge of the bank there on the right. So it doesn't take a whole lot to slow down a fire that's moving without a whole lot of wind or other factors pushing it quickly. I think this is a quick video. I apologize for the shaky camera work. I was pacing around trying to capture as much as possible, but I think it should show fairly well how just a yard, in this case, that has the leaves blown away from it can really stop the fire, a creeping litter fire in its tracks. I hope that didn't make anybody too sick watching me swing that camera around. Oh, don't play again. All right. And then the last thing I want to say about prepping fire lines and burn units is you have to be careful with dead trees in your burn unit, especially if you've got a slightly higher fire intensity that's going to throw embers up into the air, or even just dead trees that can catch fire from the fire on the ground. and the fire can travel all the way up the tree. In this case, I think it was an ember thrown farther up the tree. This was actually on a wildfire that I helped fight here in Yancey County. We ended up having to cut this tree down. The problem with dead trees, we call them snags, burning like that, especially high up, is that they can throw embers pretty far and across your fire line, and they can burn for a long time. So if dead trees like that catch fire, um, normally you have to cut them down so that they don't keep burning overnight, and keep throwing embers over your fire line. If it's in the middle of your burn unit and you're burning 20 acres, maybe you don't have to worry about it. Still, the safest thing would probably be to cut it down. But when you're prepping your burn unit, you might want to consider, really thoroughly raking around these trees so that the fire can't reach the base, or cutting some of them down so that they don't catch fire while they're standing and throw embers across your fire line. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions about fire line prep specifically? I know this was geared a little bit towards the mountains, where we use leaf blowers as our primary prep tool and wildfire fighting tool. Does anybody have any questions? So Ayala said, how do you deal with pine needles? Are you talking about pine needles on the ground or in a tree? Oh, okay. So again, pine needles, from my experience, they clear about as easily as leaf litter. So leaf blowers and rakes, kind of blowing those. Um, Normally we like to blow most of your fuel source out of your fire line away from your burn unit, so you don't have a accumulated pile of fuels along the inside of your burn unit, so that when that does burn, you get a higher fire intensity right along the edge of your burn unit. So ideally you'd blow them outside of your burn unit, or you could do a little bit of half and half. But pine needles should act pretty similarly to leaf litter. Minimum backpack blower size. A BR-200 is totally fine. I mean, really, it doesn't take a whole lot to blow, especially if you're just working in leaf litter, or grass, to kind of clear any loose debris. And you might have to come back with a BR-200 with a little bit of hand raking behind it, to clear, any sticks and small vegetative debris that didn't get blown away by the blower. But I think you could do a lot with just a BR-200. We use BR-800s, but I mean, I've prepped a burn unit with a battery Makita blower before, so it doesn't take a whole lot. All right, we're gonna keep going. So there's a few different types of fuel types that are classified by the National Wildfire Coordinating Group and the Forest Service. Grass, shrub, timber litter, which is what we have a lot up here, timber understory, and slash and blow down. Slash and blow down is going to be kind of like it sounds. Anything that was cut down or blown down, it's going to be your bigger fuels, like branches, sticks like that. And wildland fuels are grouped into 6 fuel types based on the primary fuel that carries the fire. So when we're talking about wildland fuel, it's going to be the whatever is burning while you're and carrying the fire across your burn unit. So fuel characteristics, right? We have to consider fuel loading, how much fuel, how much leaf litter is in your burn unit, the chemical content, right? So pine needles and oak leaves might burn a little different. And then, pine in general, pine wood has the chemical makeup of it, makes it burn a little more intensely than say like oak or other hardwoods that we have. Fuel arrangement, how is it laying in the burn unit? Is it kind of compacted down from snow, or is it really loose and it's been fluffed by wind? And then the moisture content is super important. When was the last time it rained? How much retained moisture is in the fuel that's going to carry your fire? And then the size and shape. pine needles are probably gonna burn a lot faster than leaf litter, and then grass, right, is gonna burn a lot faster than leaf litter. So fuel size categorizing, we got 1 hour fuels is 0 to 1/4 inch, 10-hour fuel 1/4 to 1 inch, 100-hour fuel 1 to 3, and 1,000-hour fuel. The U.S. Forest Service says it's 3 inch and bigger. NWCG says it's 8 inches and bigger. To potato, really. If you're burning 1,000-hour fuels, then you've done something wrong, in my opinion. Unless that's part of your plan, part of your prescription. If you're burning some big piles, you've got some giant logs in there, you might be burning some 1,000-hour fuel. This picture up here that I stole from National Wildfire Coordinating Group is pretty good, right? 1 hour fuels is going to be grasses and leaves, 10-hour, smaller sticks, 100-hour, some bigger branches, and 1,000-hour. I consider them more like logs. Size, and this is important for when we're talking about fuel moisture. So size and shape classifications correspond to the time it takes a piece of fuel to change its moisture content to match its environment. So 100 out or 1 hour fuel is only going to take an hour for it to acclimate to the, for the RH in the air to bring it way back down to kind of, what an environmental low would be. All right, we're going to move on. So key fuel moisture parameters. Fuel moisture is kind of one of the important, not, it isn't kind of, it is one of the important things you have to check before you do your burn. Unless you want to just go out and kind of get a feel for it. Go out and crumble some leaves and touch the grass and see what it feels like. However, that doesn't necessarily tell you all you need to know, because some of your bigger fuels and the soil itself might be too dry to burn, and you might say, oh yeah, I could definitely burn this, right? The leaves and the grass are dry. However, you might actually cause more damage than good, and you might get yourself into trouble with a fire you can't control. So some key fuel moisture parameters that we're going to look at is the Keach-Byram Drought Index. Ideally, this is where I kind of said these are my rules of thumb. Some folks may see it a little differently. And when I say ideal, it means that, right, we might be able to burn a little bit out of that if it's still within the prescription that we're talking about for our burn unit. So the KBDI between 300 and 550. Fuel moisture 1 hour, we want it between 4 and 8%. 10-hour between 8 and 12. And then 100-hour between 15 and 20. I didn't even list 1,000 on here because a lot of the time the prescribed burns, especially that we do up here in the mountains, it could be different down in other places and out west. But we're gonna try our best not to burn any 1,000-hour fuel, because that, if we light an 8-inch log on fire, it's gonna burn for a couple days unless we put it out with water, and that just kind of, it's more of a hassle. It's also a liability if your weather's going to change or you're worried about your fire spreading. So I'm going to take us to a website that you can use to check the fuel moisture in your area. And I'll try and go through this kind of slowly, but if anybody wants me to show them again, let me know. I can also, oh, no. My screen share stopped. Sorry. Let me fix that. All right. So this is the website. It's called the Fire Weather Intelligence Portal. And it was created by the North Carolina Forest Service. So what we're going to look at is we're going to zoom in. Sorry, West Coast folks. I'm going to zoom in on the East Coast, and we're going to look at some fuel moisture parameters around here. So if we zoom in kind of in the Asheville area, which is where, I'm actually up here in Burnsville, Yancey County area. So we'll just zoom in about here. And to check the fuel moisture, we're going to come over here to point data. I'm going to click on select a parameter. I'll scroll all the way down. There's a bunch of stuff you can look at if you're curious and nerdy and you want to look at all this. That's awesome. There's a lot of things on here that I don't know what they are. So for the Keach Byram Drought Index, I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to hit update point data. It's going to show us what the drought potential is, or what the drought index is for our area, for my area. Let me not cover up the graph here. So our key is showing us that the drought index is extremely low, right? We are not even close to a drought. It's been really wet here. It's winter time. We've had some snow, we've had some rain, we've had a whole bunch of things. So that's useful to know. Ideally, right, when I said before, we want it between 300 and about 550. So kind of in the yellow to orange range is more, is going to correspond to fuel types that are more receptive to fire. You could even go as low as 300 as long as you've got your fuel moisture is a little bit lower. So next I'm going to go back to select parameters. I'm going to look at fuel moisture 1 hour. I want to know what those, 0 to a quarter inch size fuels, what the fuel moisture content is in my area. All right, so it's showing us kind of a range of things here, but all pretty much above the 14, which is the top end of the key here, which means that the fuel moisture is really high. It's probably not going to burn unless it's in direct sunlight. It's had a little bit of time to dry. Again, these point datas are just are small stations that are picking up, whatever's next to them. Some of them might be more shady than others. Some of them are going to be in different fuel types. So they're going to show different things. You kind of have to walk out to your unit and assess it yourself realistically. But this just kind of gives you an idea of what the whole region is seeing, which I think is pretty cool. When we were having all those wildfires in the fall, a lot of this was red, yellow, orange. All of this fuel moisture, especially the 1 hour, was super low. We were looking in the, around 4 to 8 for most of the area. And then again, check the next thing for your 10-hour. Again, it's pretty wet around here right now. But this is a good thing to check. All right, we'll move on. We're going to go back to the slideshow. All right, hopefully everybody is back to the slideshow. So if anybody has any questions about that, please let me know. I know that was pretty fast. And some people might say, well, I don't really care what the fuel moisture is around my area. I just want to go out in my burn unit and feel what the fuel type feels like. I'm going to see what the grass feels like, see what the leaves feel like. And that's fine. It's really up to you. Choose your own adventure. I think this is a good thing to check. And it's a good thing to include in your burn plan. If you're going to go that route and write a full prescribed burn plan. And it's a good way to make sure that if the whole region is looking really low and the 100-hour fuel is all the way down to like 5 or something, you might not want to burn because you might be setting yourself up for a wildfire event. You might be lighting a wildfire. All right. The next thing we're going to look at is key fire weather parameters. So the key things we're going to look at is minimum relative humidity, or RH, ideally between 25 and 40 for me. Max wind speeds, ideally 1 to 6 miles per hour on the surface wind speeds. There's a different wind speed called your transport wind speed and your transport wind height. We're not going to worry about that too much. And then wind gusts no higher than 12, ideally. You can get a little bit higher than that if you're brave. Maximum mixing height, ideally between ideally, I don't know why I put between there, 1640 and up. The EPA and the Clean Air Act actually says that it should be 1700 feet and up. And your mixing height is going to be kind of that ideal temperature difference in the atmosphere where your smoke hits and then it gets dispersed and transported away from your area. And then your max ventilation rate. Again, I think the units for that is in not feet, and it's really just how fast that smoke is going to get ventilated from your area. You don't want to burn when the ventilation rate is too low, because otherwise your smoke is just going to stay on the ground. It's going to, it could cause hazards for traffic, or it could cause hazards for people with health concerns or health sensitivities to smoke. And so this website here was going to take us to the fire weather dashboard, which is probably the best tool that I've used. It's the most, the tool that I use the most frequently for trying to plan burns. And I'll have to change my share again. Oh gosh. All right. So the fire weather dashboard, this thing is amazing. It's run by the National Weather Service. Again, it's a world map. This one is all across the US. So no matter where you live, this is a really useful tool. I'm going to zoom in to about the same region that I was looking at a minute ago with the fuel moistures, around Asheville, Mars Hill, Burnsville. And I'm going to zoom all the way in to my area. This is pretty precise. Well, when I say precise, as precise as a weather forecast can be, but it sort of it pulls data from pretty close to where you're clicking. So I'm going to click here in Yancey County, Salto Valley. And I'm going to come down here, and it's updated this forecast. So this is what we call a fire weather forecast. It's projecting out about a week, but it can only give you some things within a couple days. So like I had on the slide a second ago, the key things that I like to look at, or that, the minimum things you really should be looking at, are your minimum RH. So for tomorrow, we're down to 33. That's pretty good. That might even be a good burn day right there. Because when the RH is low, it's going to dry out your fuels. It's going to allow the fire to carry consistently and evenly, and ideally dry out your fuels. Maybe even Friday would be a good burn day, because we've had Thursday to dry it out a little bit. So the next thing that I like to look at that's pretty important would be your max and your minimum wind. Well, minimum wind is not that important, but your max wind is pretty important. So this is the aggregate miles per hour that you're going to get on the day. So if we're still looking at Thursday, for example, our max wind speed is going to be 8. That's a little above the range that I like to burn in. But if we come down here to our gusts, that's not too bad. It does give us a max wind gust time and direction, which is also pretty important. So your wind direction, that's pretty key if you live next to what we call a smoke sensitive area. Some people have probably heard of that. That could be a highway or a school, or something that you ideally wouldn't send a whole bunch of smoke to. So that's a pretty important thing to look at, especially for your burn plan. And then your wind speeds are pretty important. A 13-mile-an-hour max wind gust is probably within reason, for a lot of folks, although it depends on your comfort level and where you're burning and the types of fuel. The other key things that we want to look at is our mixing height. Like I said, 1640 is kind of a minimum. Your maximum mixing height is pretty much going to be at the hottest point of the day, or when the sun is highest in the sky, when you've got the most temperature difference between the different layers of the atmosphere. That's going to allow your smoke to transport. And then your max ventilation rate. I think the colors speak more than anything. But ideally we'd be, 43 is around the minimum we want to be at for a ventilation rate, because that's going to mean that our smoke is going to travel up and away from the area we're burning. The caveat on all of this, especially the mixing height and the ventilation rate, is that if you're only burning, a half acre to, maybe 3 or 4 acres, it's not that big a deal. You're going to produce a lot of smoke depending on what you're burning and what the fuel, what amount of fuel is in the burn unit. But um, if you want to be nice to your neighbors, it's good to pick a better burn day using, paying attention to these factors, the ventilation rate, the mixing height. Um, but if all your other parameters are lining up just right and something's a little low, and you're not worried about, following a tight prescription and getting signed off by a certified burner, then I think you could go ahead and take the leap. But just know that if you live really close to a highway or something, you may get yourself into some trouble. And if you want sort of a detailed outlook for a fire weather forecast, um, you can click on a couple links here, and it'll give you a discussion about the fire weather for the day and the next night and maybe the next day. And then it'll give you some more detailed information with your transport wind miles per hour, mixing height, vent rates. This is a pretty cool thing. And I like to print these off normally and take them with me when I'm burning. All the Forest Service folks do this as well. It's good to have on the day of your burn the weather forecast showing anyone who shows up, whether it be enforcement, fire department, or anyone on your burn is just curious, about what the weather forecast was for that day. All right. Does anybody have any questions about the fire weather dashboard or fire weather in general before I move on?
This is Kyle Rice. I just wanted to make sure the screen that you're showing right now, you got that through the portal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you go to the National Weather Service, or if you just Google fire weather dashboard, that's the best way to get to this screen. And then once you zoom in on your region, just click and it'll sort of aggregate a spot weather forecast for you, and scroll down and it updates automatically whenever you click somewhere. I guess I want to show y'all. So then back to my slide here. I had oops. This is a spot weather forecast from a burn that we did back in December and I'm sorry, November. Getting my burns mixed up. And this one shows kind of what we burn on Thursday. So this is kind of what we decided. We were within range for a lot of our parameters. So the RH was 25. Oops. No, go back. RH was minimum RH was 25, which was kind of on the bottom range of what I was comfortable with. And when we were actually measuring it the day of with some moisture meters, we were getting a little bit lower than that, just in the sun with a little bit of a breeze blowing. But we were still seeing fire behavior that we were comfortable with and we were able to control. We also had, wind gusts of 8 miles an hour, kind of in a northwesterly direction, which didn't really matter for me too much, because of where we were burning. But we also had, fairly low winds, max wind speed of 5. That was honestly with the fire line widths that we had, that was pretty perfect. Any more than that, we would have gotten maybe a little bit scared, but we had probably only 4-foot wide fire lines, and maybe 2.5 foot flame lengths. And then our vent rates and mixing heights were kind of in the yellow to red. It wasn't fantastic, but it was high enough that I wasn't too worried about smoke staying too near the surface. And we actually ended up, with some really good smoke uplift. It didn't stay, we had really good visibility down on the ground. and we weren't burning so much. It was only, I think, a half acre in this case, right next to a house. So we weren't burning so much fuel that we were going to produce enough smoke to smoke out the entire valley. But we produced a pretty good amount. You can see it from, 5 or 6 miles away. Any questions about that? And Kyle, I hope I answered your question. If I didn't, let me know. Awesome. Well, we can come back to this too if there's any other questions. Let me check the chat real quick. Okay. Oh, Felix put that in the chat, the link to the fire weather dashboard. That's great. Um, Thank you for doing that. And so this is a good useful tool, right? So that, we can look ahead at the week, look ahead and start looking at the RHs and thinking about, okay, oh, this is going to dry out the next few days and then it's going to be a little higher, but maybe that would be a good burn day because the RH won't be so low. Or maybe I want to burn when the RH is really low. And then kind of when we're checking, we think, a week out, we identify, oh, maybe Tuesday would be a good burn day. And as we get closer, we can keep checking it every day because they're going to change this every day. The wind direction might change a little bit. And then we need to, once we get a couple days out, sort of looking at the vent rate and the mixing height, and keep checking the wind direction and wind speeds and making sure that it's going to align with what you want for your burn. If you're worried about smoking out your neighbor and the wind is blowing only that direction, the whole week, it might change the day before and you get a good wind and you can let everybody know, hey, we can burn tomorrow. Or it might be the opposite. You might think it's going to be gray all week. And then the day before the forecast is showing the wind is going to push smoke straight at your neighbor's house. And you might, if you don't have a good relationship with your neighbor, that might not work out. So it kind of just depends on your circumstance. All right, we're going to go to the next slide. So this is a cool video of a prescribed burn. A little bit of context, the RH for this was, I think it was in the upper teens, maybe mid-teens. The fuel moisture was really low. This is in a hardwood leaf litter. I wasn't there on this day. I got this video from somebody. But a pretty cool example of really low fuel moisture and RH. And also a good example of why we don't always light off from the bottom of a slope, especially if you've got something you don't want to burn at the top of the slope. If anyone's been on a burn with me or seen other burns, especially in the mountains, a lot of times if we've got something we don't want to burn, or if we want to, widen our fire line at the top of a ridge or a hill, we'll light off from the top and burn it down at least a certain distance so that we have what we call the black, or fuel that's been burned, at the top of a ridge. Because it's kind of intuitive that fire is going to want to travel faster uphill, right? It's going to preheat the fuel above it, with the flames below. So it's only going to burn faster, as it carries uphill. Now, enough talking. I'm going to show this video. You can see this guy down on the right. That kind of gives you an idea of the scale. That's pretty fast. That's a really hot, fast moving fire. None of the burns that I've been on personally have looked like that. This landowner had a bunch of land. They were experimenting with some different flaming techniques and different fire intensity. So kind of just a different way of doing things, to each their own, really. But a pretty cool example. Oops, we don't need to see it again. Sorry. Oh, what's happening? Okay, so this is that burn for the fire weather forecast that I showed you all a second ago, right? 5-mile-an-hour winds, nothing too crazy. RH around 25, so a little higher than that last video. And this is on flat land, right? But still leaf litter, hardwood, kind of around some rhodos and hollies right against the road. Wow. And there's me exclaiming at, I was surprised actually the intensity we were getting right there. And the wind, you can see it pushing it a little bit. The fire itself was creating a little bit of wind, a little bit of micro weather, but still fire intensity that we were prepared for. We had fire lines that we thought were adequate. nothing that was scaring us at all. Just really cool to see, and had the desired effects. Killed some of these rhodos in here, killed some of the hollies. Oh, don't do that. All right, so a burn plan. Hopefully a lot of you maybe have seen one of these before or have heard about people talk about it anyways. But it is only required in North Carolina if you're burning 50 acres or more. And I say required, because you can do it if you're burning less than that and you still want to be either diligent and go through the processes, go through the motions, or if it's signed by a North Carolina certified burner and the prescription is followed, a burn boss or the landowner is protected from smoke liability, which is pretty important, especially if you're burning a huge amount of land. Or the bigger, it makes sense, right? The more land or fuels you burn, the more smoke you're going to create. So the Forest Service and other agencies like that, when they do big burns, they of course are going to make sure that they're covered under, they're trying to cover their butts a little bit. And it's the same thing with private landowners burning larger amounts of fuel, or even just close to smoke sensitive areas like near a highway. Of course, if you burn on a day when the wind is going to push it straight into a highway, and you cause a car crash, you might be held negligent a little bit. But if you follow this prescription, if you create a burn plan, a North Carolina certified burner signs off on it, and you identify, all right, we can't burn if the wind is pushing it directly at this highway, then you should be covered from smoke liability. And if the weather changes and something unforeseen happens, you can't account for everything, then you could still be protected. If smoke crosses the highway and causes an accident. Does anybody have anything to add to that? It's kind of hard to explain burn and smoke liability very well. I have a trouble with it, but that's kind of my understanding of it anyways. A lot of times the burn units that we're burning are small enough or remote enough that we don't have to worry about this too much. However, the last burn we did was close enough to a small road that we decided we didn't want a whole bunch of smoke being blown directly at that road. We also were pretty adamant that we didn't want smoke blowing at the neighbor's house. So we made sure we had a wind direction that favored that. Ayla says, so just check with the state's Forest Service for our requirements. Yes, if you talk with your ranger, they'll help you, your county ranger, they can help you identify what your requirements are in your county or your state. But as North Carolina as a whole, you are protected from liability from the smoke that you produce if you fill out a burn plan that is signed off by a North Carolina certified burner, whether that's yourself if you become certified or you get someone to help you burn boss it. Then you can be protected from liability. But if you're burning less than 50 acres, like a lot of ours are up here in the mountains, we don't have to have a burn plan. All you've got to do is fill out a burn permit, just like you would for a campfire or brush fire. Whoops. So to go to find where the burn plan is, or to download one, you go to the North Carolina Forest Service website, just their home page. If you go to programs and services, you can click on prescribed fire. There's a lot of good information on here for anyone in North Carolina, or if you're in a different state, I would hope that your state would have, their specific regulations on here. This page is great for the North Carolina Forest Service. They talk about, there's links to the Prescribed Burn Act. If you want some information about that, they talk about why fire is good. There's a lot of good resources. You can actually reach out to the North Carolina Forest Service and they will do some prescribed burns for you. I think they're a little bit backed up and it can take them a while to get to you, especially if you have a small amount of land. But it is possible. And also reaching out to your county ranger and forming a relationship with them, whether you're in North Carolina or a different state. So in North Carolina, if you go down to prescribed firearm prescribed fire plan form. And this is a fillable form on the website. If you're not in North Carolina and you like this form better than whatever your state has, I encourage you to use it. It's pretty thorough and it's a really cool thing to do, even if it's not required. If you're burning less than 50 acres and you're not going to get it signed off, it's still a cool way to check yourself and make sure that you're going through the motions, you're observing. You've looked at your slopes, you've looked at your fuel type and your depth, and you've looked at the direction to smoke sensitive areas and stuff like that. And you've done a little bit of math to figure out how much smoke you're actually going to produce. And then there's this whole section here for acceptable range of weather parameters that you can fill out. And a lot of that comes from that fire weather dashboard that we were looking at earlier. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in burning on their land to become familiar with that fire weather dashboard. And then, oh, sorry. Well, I didn't want to click away. Down here, right, we've got our mixing heights. We just looked at that on the fire weather dashboard. We've got our wind directions, temperature ranges, RH ranges, KBDI, that Keach Byram Drought Index. This is kind of, where you can put in your acceptable range for that. And then that fine fuel moisture. Fine fuel is 1 hour fuel. That's the same thing. So if you go to that fire weather intelligence portal where we had the map and it showed us the different fuel moistures for 1 hour, 100 hour, 10 hour, this would be your 1 hour fine fuel range. And on this slide, on this presentation, I had that range that I like to work within ideally. So if anyone has any questions or would like to, I'll share this recorded webinar with everybody afterwards, and you can use that as your own range, or you could do some other a different range. And this is cool because they ask about other weather considerations. And then this is where you can get your certified burner to sign off. And it's also cool at the bottom of this burn plan. You talks about your resources needed, your prep for your burn, whether you've notified 911, North Carolina Forest Service. And then you've got kind of like a burn execution checklist and just like a post-burn evaluation that you can look through and review with the people who are at the burn or just yourself, if you want to hold yourself accountable about whether you've met your burn objectives or you've partially met them. And you can kind of reflect on what the fire behavior was and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Oh, so I want to go back to presentation. Apologies for my technical difficulties here. So the last slide, I think this is the last slide, is permits and courtesy. So like I said, if you want to be a really thorough burner, or maybe it's required for what you're doing, that prescribed burn plan that I just showed you is important to do, and it has to be submitted to the North Carolina. It has to be submitted to the North Carolina Forest Service. Ideally, it's submitted to the district before you do your burn, and that can take up to a week or so. If you have a good relationship with your county ranger, they might just say, yeah, just email it to me the day before. And that's really, then the liability's on them. But if you're burning such a small amount, they may say, are you really worried about smoke? But I still like to do it every single time anyways. Fill out that burn plan, identify your weather parameters so that you, if anything does go wrong, and God forbid you end up in court, you can show, we filled this out We went through all the motions. We tried to make sure we were going to stay within these parameters. We had, one thing that got out of control. We had a sudden wind burst or something. I mean, things happen. We had a tree fall and it escaped. It is required to, if you're going to burn with a certified burn plan, to notify your neighbors. Um, I don't think you have to actually get a response from them as long as you put something in their mailbox or you've sent them an email, left them a message. That's the bare minimum. Um, I would notify your local fire department in case they want to help out, or just to put them on notice so that if they see a bunch of smoke that day, they're going to think, oh, yeah, we know what that's from. They told me they were going to burn today. And a lot of times, if it's on a Saturday or something like that, they might be able to send, one or two crew members down there with a fire truck to just sit there while you burn, maybe by your house if it's nearby, just as kind of a backup. We like to do that in our district. Kind of gives us a sense of security. And then bare minimum, whether you're burning 50 acres or 250 acres or half an acre, you need to go online and get an open burning permit. And I'll show you how to do that right here. Again, go to the North Carolina Forest Service homepage. I'm assuming it'd be similar in a different state. Scroll on down to the quick links section, burning permits. It's going to tell you about smoke and danger, and it'll also hopefully notify you if there's a burn ban in effect in your area. And then you'll just choose your county that you live in. This takes about 2 minutes to do this burn plan. You can do it from your phone too. I'm in Yancey County. And then you'll just scroll down, and you'll fill out some basic information, your name, if you live in which community you live in, number of miles from a landmark, the date range that your fire is going to start in. So you could do this the day before, you could do it the morning of, you could also do it, a week ahead of time if you know exactly what day your burn's going to be on. It's going to ask you about what kind of fuels you're going to be burning. It's got to be permitted burning fuels, ideally, nothing man-made. The acres you're going to burn, if you're just burning a brush pile, I just do like 0.02 acres or something like that. It's important, even if you're doing a small brush pile, to get a burn permit, because it does cover your butt if the Forest Service has to come out and put out an escaped fire. And then your address, phone number, stuff like that, and that's it. Oh, I wasn't sharing my screen that entire time. I am a doofus. This is what this looks like, everybody. Sorry about that. This is the burn permit online. Fuels, acres, address. Sorry about that. And I'll go back just for the benefit. This is where you select your county. And then from the home page, you're just going to go to quick links, burn permits, put in your county and hit go. All right. Let me go back to my presentation. And then the last thing that I think is really important is on the morning of your burn, call the non-emergency dispatch number the morning of your burn, so that if any of your neighbors or someone nearby your community sees a huge column of smoke, they call 911, say, the woods are on fire. Then the dispatchers have already been notified, like, oh yeah, they were doing a prescribed burn in that area on this day. They can tell the members of the public who've called in that that's probably what's going on. They may send someone out just as a courtesy, a fire department member, just to make sure that that's what it is and it's not escaped. But it's a good thing to do. That way you don't have, like, I know around here in Yancey County, if there's a smoke investigation or someone sees a fire from the road and they call 911, they're going to page out like 4 or 5 fire districts, and they're all going to come racing in, lights blazing. That causes a public safety concern on highways, on roads. It also is tying up resources if there is a real fire. So it's a pretty important thing to do. And again, having that relationship with your local fire department is pretty important. All right, that's all the structured presentation that I have. If anyone has any specific questions, non-specific questions, has any questions about anything that we didn't talk about, this is the time. And I appreciate you sitting through me talking for an hour. I'm going to stop my screen share. Let's see. Ella said, how do you know what your expected flame length is? That's a great question. I would have to say just from experience is kind of what I would go by. But I think you could probably extrapolate a little bit. I think the finer your fuels are, the higher the flame length is going to be, and the drier it is. I would say your flame length could be as high as twice the height of your fuel height. So if you've got maybe a 20, or a 10-foot high brush pile, you might have 20 to 25-foot flame lengths. If you've got, only 6 inches of leaf litter, but it's pretty packed down, it may not all burn, depending on how dry it is. But if you've got, 6 inches of leaf litter and it's pretty loose, you might get 1 foot, which would be twice the thickness of your fuel, or you might get 2-foot flame length, depending on if there's a little bit of wind driving it a little faster. And depending on how dry it is, it may consume faster and hotter, which is going to mean your flame length is going to be a little taller. I know that was kind of a non-answer, but that's the best I've got. If you're curious about what, if you're going to burn a whole patch of leaves or something, or a woody section of a leafy section of woods, you might make a little leaf pile separately, kind of replicate what your fuel type might be, light it on fire in a controlled way, maybe in a parking area or something, and just see what it does. See how high your flames are. I think the best way to learn is by doing a little bit. And so, every time you see a little bit of fire, it's gonna become more familiar, and you're gonna have a better idea of what to expect next time. Um, yeah, I guess when I've showed, that reminds me again, thanks, Ayla. That reminds me, I think when I've done like some burn examples with some kids before, or with a college we did, Felix and I, we just put like in a big gravel parking lot, we piled up some leaves and grass. It would have been a good burn day actually that day. We weren't burning, but we were like, okay, this kind of replicates some conditions that we might see on an actual burn day. And we just lit it in a, maybe it was like a 6x6 pile of leaves, only about 4 inches thick, which is kind of what we were expecting our fuel type would be in that area. Just to kind of show them what the fire looks like when it's creeping, about how fast it goes too. It's kind of nice to see what you're going to expect. I know the videos that I showed here didn't really show, those look pretty intense. But a lot of the times, if you go to our website or our Facebook page, you'll see some examples of some much more tame fire creeping really slowly across the ground. Most of the time, you're going to be able to step over the flames, your flame front. You're going to be able to walk back and forth across it over and over again. If it's, if it's on flat ground or even just a gentle slope. Jonathan said, do you do a test fire before you ignite the burn unit? Great question. Yes, I didn't hit on that. But yes, absolutely do a test fire the morning of. Because right, you might have done all your prep, you might have checked all your boxes, you might have the perfect weather conditions that you think. You put it all together, and then you do a test fire the morning of on a small detached section of your burn unit, or even just a small section of your burn unit that you can put out easily with water, or if you've got a separate fire line around it, and just see what the fire behavior is. If it's more intense than you were expecting, you might want to say, maybe we need to wait until the humidity drops again, or maybe we need to wait, till tomorrow, the humidity will be a little bit lower. Or you may do your test fire and it may not burn at all. we were going to burn 250 acres a couple weeks ago with the U.S. Forest Service. We had all the resources there. It looked like a good burn day. And then we did our test fire and the fire wouldn't carry it all. The snow had packed it down. It was a little bit more moist. And we had to call it off. So it's definitely a good idea to do a test fire. That's a great question. Kyle said, looking for ladders. Oh, great point. So ladder fuels, I didn't really talk about that. So ladder fuel would be a fuel that's kind of either in your mid-story or between your main fuel source on the ground, maybe like a rhododendron or a brush, or maybe some shorter trees, or even vines crawling up trees. A ladder fuel, right? It's kind of it's a ladder, ladder. Think about it as a way for fire to climb from the ground up into the canopy and maybe create conditions that you're not comfortable with. Ideally, we're not lighting the canopy on fire. Unless that's part of your prescription. I mean, some people want to absolutely decimate patches of rhodos and they'll burn it when it's super dry. They'll try and catch the rhodos on fire. And out west, you see a lot more of that kind of ladder fuel, lower branches, shorter trees, lifting the ground fire up into the canopy of those ponderosa pines and just absolutely carrying the fire through the trees. A little less common out here in the east. Did I miss any questions or anybody have any more? Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. I hopefully recorded this correctly and I will post it to our Facebook, and I'll also send it out in our mailing list. And if you're not on our mailing list and you want to be, please shoot me an email. I'll put it in the chat right now. I don't send out many emails. Mostly it's volunteer opportunities for burn prep and burns, and maybe I'll share some events in our region, or just I think good resources for burning. Let me know. Shoot me an email if you want to be on that mailing list. Bridge. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate you coming. I'm going to end the meeting.
Thanks, Zach.
Cheers. Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good work.